Stella Maris by Cormac McCarthy, the coda / companion piece to The Passenger, and more than likely the last book that McCarthy will ever publish. Reading this was something of a bittersweet experience for me. Now, with The Passenger, I wrote up a pretty meticulous script to read from in my analysis / review because I had a lot of thoughts about that book, a lot of things I wanted to get down and get across in the most coherent fashion possible. But for this book, I chose not to go that route because I honestly can't think of a whole lot to say about this book, or at least not that the book doesn't already explicitly say itself. However, there are a couple of things that I would like to touch upon and articulate, if I may. Some things that I think may be of some interest and which I haven't really seen anybody else picking up on. But Stella Maris, as I said, is the coda to The Passenger. It also functions as a prequel. That's right, it is both a prequel and a coda at the same time, as oxymoronic as that may sound. It takes place about 8 years prior to the events of The Passenger, and it is the story, or at least a snippet of the story, of Alicia Western, who was Bobby Western's deceased, brilliant sister, whom he was tragically in love with in that book. And though she did appear in that book in the italicized intro sections to each chapter, we got a lot less of her than we did of Bobby in that book, but this is very much her story, and it is presented as the transcripts of her therapy sessions with one Dr. Cohen. Stella Maris is a mental facility, and other than the first page of this book, which is presented as an admittance form as Alicia commits herself into this facility, other than that, this book is 100% dialogue. In fact, I can scarcely even call this a novel. It is very much a modern day Socratic dialogue dressed up as a novel. It's also a lot shorter than The Passenger, and as a result of that, I kind of anticipate this review being a bit shorter as well. But in the book, Alicia has come to Stella Maris to check herself in because she has nowhere else to go, because Bobby is lying in a coma in Italy as a result of a race car accident, because as it's mentioned in The Passenger, he drove race cars and he had an accident and he is comatose, and the doctors were asking her to fill out the termination form so they could pull the plug on him because they did not think he would ever recover. And this really does quicken the tragedy of these two books because, as we know from reading The Passenger, he did recover. And Alicia, her suicide, if only she had waited, that's kind of the tragedy. If only she had waited, maybe she wouldn't have wanted to kill herself. But anyway, so she checks herself into this facility, and then this book is just presented as seven. That's a mystical number, by the way, as seven therapy sessions with one Dr. Cohen, and they just talk about stuff, a lot of stuff. Most of the concepts and ideas and themes in this book were introduced previously in The Passenger. They're just kind of explored in greater depth here. This is very much a companion piece. This is not a standalone experience, and that was kind of a slight issue that I had with it, is it really doesn't stand on its own. I'm very thankful that I got these books in a box set together, because I can just imagine somebody in a bookstore just picking this up, knowing nothing about it, on a whim and saying, hey, this looks interesting, I'll read this. You ain't going to have a damn clue what this book is about or what's happening if you read it like that. You really do need to read The Passenger first. But anyway, so Alicia and Dr. Cohen just talk a lot about stuff, her life. McCarthy really does a good job of using this to round her out as a character and make her more fully realized. They talk about events in her life, and they also talk about mathematics, really advanced mathematics, physics, science, and how these things relate to human existence and what they say about the universe. And a lot, basically just more of what you got in The Passenger, just in a little greater depth. But there is something very interesting about this book that I wanted to touch upon that I haven't seen anybody else pick up on, and that is that this book connects to another Cormac McCarthy book, one of his most overlooked books, and that would be Cities of the Plain, the third and final volume of the Border trilogy. In this book, Stella Maris, Alicia mentions to her therapist, Dr. Cohen, that when she was young, she had a vision, a dream, some kind of experience like that, where she saw through a hole in a doorway and saw something that she says she was never meant to see, something arcane, I suppose. It's kind of hard to understand exactly what it was she saw. She says that there were like sentries, like guards guarding something, and when they saw her, they were surprised because it very much is presented as like getting, seeing behind the veil of Isis, getting a glimpse behind a curtain you're not supposed to see behind. But anyway, so she had a vision of seeing something through a knothole in a doorway. And what she calls this mysterious and sinister sounding something is the architron. And this, as far as I can tell, is a word strictly of McCarthy's own invention. But the interesting thing is that this is not the first time he has used that word. He used that word in Cities of the Plain. In the epilogue section of that book, a now elderly Billy Parham meets a mysterious stranger under a highway overpass whom he believes to be death incarnate come to collect him. Now, we never know whether that's actually the case or not, but this mysterious stranger proceeds to relate to Billy a very convoluted and extremely mystical and just kind of crazy dream that he had. And in that dream, he makes reference to an entity called the architron. That's right, these books actually do connect. And that's the thing I haven't really seen anybody pick up on yet, is that there is a direct callback in Stella Maris to a previous McCarthy book in the form of that word architron. Now, again, I don't really know, this word doesn't exist, he just made it up, but we can unpack a little bit of it. The prefix arch means chiefly or principally, of chief or principal importance, like the word archetype, and the word tron, I don't really know what that means. Actually, that kind of does, the word tron does have some relationship to subatomic particles, which is appropriate considering that the Passenger and Stella Maris are about subatomics to a degree. But I don't know exactly what the precise meaning of the word architron is. But what's very interesting is the implications of what this vision of Alicia's means and what it might say about Mr. McCarthy himself. Because I believe that Stella Maris is probably the most blatant and open work that he has ever written in terms of him revealing himself to us. This is a very thin partition between just him spewing his own thoughts and beliefs through the mouthpiece of this character. And it's very interesting to me what those may be. Now, I did a video about Herman Melville's Moby Dick called What Moby Dick is Really About. You can check that out if you want. And in that video, I said, I explained that Moby Dick is basically a Gnostic gospel. It is a book very concerned with Gnosticism. And if you don't know what Gnosticism is, either look it up or watch the Moby Dick video where I explain it. But suffice it to say, there has been a lot of work written on a Gnostic influence on Cormac McCarthy's body of work. And I don't think that is anywhere more apparent than here. What Alicia presents through her vision of the architron, whatever that may be, is decidedly Gnostic. In fact, she even mentions the word Gnosticism in this book. There's actually a part where she explicitly says the word Gnostic, so I think McCarthy is being a lot less veiled in this book, and I think this really does kind of show a better glimpse of his worldview than we've ever gotten to see. And that is that I think he probably does believe that there is some kind of uh, intelligence, and perhaps not a wholly benevolent intelligence behind everything in creation. Like in Blood Meridian, can any man say that there is not some malign thing set against him? Or I'm paraphrasing, I'm sure. But it's interesting to me because in the passenger, a major theme, as I said in my video of that, is that consciousness is necessary for existence, sort of, in a way. If you you got to kind of think about it the way he wants you to think about it. But it does make sense that without consciousness, nothing really can be said to exist because there's nothing there to perceive it to exist. And if you extrapolate that out, you kind of do come to a theistic sort of conclusion that if everything exists and if consciousness is necessary for things to exist, then it does stand to reason that things exist because there is some grand consciousness that perhaps put them there. But it is the nature of this consciousness that is called into question in Stella Maris because it is portrayed as decidedly sinister and kind of eerie, what Alicia describes seeing, and it really does just kind of add a new dimension to not only this book but also kind of all of McCarthy's back catalog. I really do think he was being a lot more obvious, a lot more direct and forward with this book as to what he believes. But it's very interesting, and again, this book does connect in a direct way to Cities of the Plain, not narratively but thematically by the use of that word architron. I'm not entirely sure what the full and true nature of that connection is, but it actually is a real callback to a previous book of his, which I was not expecting to see. And basically, the universe is a rigged game, an illusion created by something, which Alicia denotes as the architron, and that all her hallucinations that are described in the passenger are possibly sent by this entity to make sure she doesn't delve too deeply because she already got a glimpse at something she wasn't meant to see. And basically, the science and the mathematics to which she has dedicated her life are not getting her anywhere because things are set up in such a way that you can't get there with the tools that you're given. Basically, you're put in a situation that you can't see outside of, and even the tools that you're given are put there by the same whatever that made the universe itself, and you can't penetrate outside unless you're already outside of it. At least I think that's what he's saying, and that it's basically a hopeless endeavor, and that's kind of why she kills herself because she realizes that what you're given to work with is never going to lead to the kind of knowledge that you really want. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what I got out of this book. It was, and I've heard a lot of people say that this was like really, really sad, one of the saddest books they've ever read. It really is sad, but I didn't really find it nearly as moving as The Passenger. And that's kind of another issue I had with it. I really did love Stella Maris, but I didn't like it quite as much as The Passenger. I gave The Passenger an A plus. I think I'm going to give Stella Maris an A minus. It is still a crackerjack book. I'm so glad I read it. I love it, but it gives you a lot to chew on because it's just nothing but a bombardment of highbrow mathematical concepts and such. Um, but it doesn't really have much of a story. It's just again a Socratic dialogue basically, which I like. I mean, I could read about this kind of stuff all day because it's fascinating. But I just didn't like it quite as much as The Passenger, but I still do love it. So yeah, I give it an A minus. But that's as much as I think I could say on this book. It's just a whole lot of mathematical, scientific jargon, and then some interesting Gnostic subtext involving some potentially malicious um, entity called the architron, which is mentioned in a previous McCarthy book. And What the ultimate meaning to all of this is, I don't have a clue, but man, was it fun to read about, and I'm so happy with how these two books turned out because I love them and I will treasure them, I'm sure, always. So, Stella Maris, have you read Stella Maris by Cormac McCarthy? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read Stella Maris, well, make sure you read The Passenger first, but definitely give it a go because it really does deepen that book. It provides new context and everything. Really great experience. It just doesn't. It's just not as well rounded of an experience, I don't think, as that other book. Because that other book had the ideas, the math, and the science, but it also had much more character and much more emotion, and it actually had a plot, sort of. So I just like that one more. But yeah, definitely do give Stella Maris a read after you read that one because it is well worth it. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, deuces.